This is Morgan Hazelwood, back again with more writing tips and writerly musings. Today, I'm here to talk to you about tips for writing combat. Where do you focus? Sharing more tips from Virtual Balticon 54. The panel description was even veterans and longtime practitioners can have problems writing fight scenes that are both compelling and realistic. How is someone new supposed to keep up? We'll discuss getting experience with the weapons you're writing about, how to handle pacing in brawls, skirmishes, and battles, and how to keep the tensions high when your protagonists have to survive. While the panel didn't keep strictly to these subjects, we definitely went over some of them. These are my notes from the titular panel at Virtual Balticon 54. The panelists were James Mendez-Hodes, Gene Adams, Ken Schrader, and Ryan Van Loan. First up, we talked about ways to decide which details to focus on. So there are some questions you're going to have to ask yourself. First, who is the character? Are they a new fighter? If so, they're probably going to focus on the big things, like the gun, the scary things, the gun, the knife, the big guy coming at them. A new fighter is going to be surprised by some things about combat, maybe how much their hand hurts after throwing a punch, how loud the gunshot is, and the ringing in their ears that just doesn't stop, and what hitting that other person's gut felt like. Meanwhile, a trained fighter can usually notice smaller details, at least until their lizard brain takes over. They can analyze their detail, at least before they get into things, and sometimes time slows down for them. I know, I used the word time twice in that sentence. You'll live. So secondly, you got to ask yourself, what type of scene are you trying to show? In Hollywood, you've got every move works for the main character or whoever's supposed to win the fight. Every punch hits, every dodge works, unless the plot needs it to do something else. In real life, people don't move as expected, and you're left mostly just trying to react as the situation keeps changing. The third question to ask yourself is, what is your character's flaw? When dealing with a character in combat, they're usually dealing with some sort of weakness. That's why they're in the fight and not, celebrating already. Are they in the fight because they won't back down or they have to instigate? Is the weakness something that might cause them to lose this fight? Or is overcoming this the purpose of showing this fight? You got to think about why this character is fighting, why this fight scene needs to be on screen. Which leads into the next question. What is this scene's purpose? The scene needs to either reveal something new about the character, move the plot forward, and or raise the stakes. The best scenes do all of these. Here's a note from some other panels. Please don't have the bad guy hurting babies or women just to show that they're bad. It's cliche, it's overdone, and can be done far more subtly with just as much impact. It's lazy and overdone, and you can do better. So those are the questions you want to have going through your head when you're deciding if the scene needs to be in there and the approach to take. So now let's get into tips for actually writing the combat. First, use visceral details. You can keep them focused on the main character, what they're feeling. It doesn't even need to be graphic, but you want to show their physical and emotional reactions. Focus on sensory detail. Emotions like anger, fear, panic. Smells and sounds, they might heighten or be unexpected. And feelings, texture, pain, loss of sensation if something goes numb or they, pass out. Secondly, walk through it. Sit down with a family member or a friend and just make sure it tracks. Or just, literally act it out. Third, make sure they're hurting after the fight. If you get into a hand-to-hand fight, you're going to be hurting the next day. You're going to be tired after 30 seconds, you're going to be exhausted after 3 minutes, and your adrenaline is going to crash hard once you're safe. Note, the Indiana Jones movies got some shout outs for showing him bruised and battered after a fist fight. So just remember that your character is probably mortal and should act like it. And if they're not mortal, they're probably fighting things that are also not mortal and can really pack a wallop. Fourth tip for writing combat: being in the military doesn't make you an automatic expert at every fighting style. First off, basic is more of an intro to the skills that you're going to be learning and what your specialty might eventually be. And most military is only taught some hand-to-hand basics. The rest is personal choice. And the fifth and final tip for writing combat: fighters have limits, especially during war. I try to quote Ryan Van Loan, but it might be a paraphrase. Everyone has a cup, and if it overflows, you break. If someone can help or give you a break, you can recover. And that's talking about the stress and the mental strain that being in combat takes on a person. In other words, this is why we give soldiers respite, why we rotate them off the front lines, even if they can still hear the bombing, and why so many have trouble transferring back to civilian life. So, those are tips for what to think about and tips for writing. But, there's a lot you probably don't know, and there's a lot I know I don't know. So let's talk about researching and writing what you don't know. I mean, I write fantasy. I'm clearly not a proponent of write what you know, but that doesn't mean that these things aren't knowable and that you can't do research and find out more. So some suggested war throughout the ages in media: Restrepo, an Iraqi war documentary; Matterhorn, a novel of the Vietnam War by Carl Marlantes. The History Channel has a lot of useful stuff. You gotta sift through it these days a little more than you used to. Legion versus Phalanx, the epic struggle for infantry supremacy in the ancient world by Mike Cole. That's Mykecole. On YouTube, Shadiversary goes over lots of swords and lots of weaponry. And the essay, We Have Always Fought, challenging the women, cattle, and slaves narrative, an essay by Cameron Hurley. So those are some really good resources, at least as a starting point. Other ways to research fight scenes: beta readers. Ask people who fight in the style you're writing. Read fight scenes. Study the pacing. Study the blows and the interaction. And some of the panelists' favorite books for fight scenes: Dune by Frank Herbert, especially the ending, and Wheel of Time's The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan. So, that's a lot to take in, but it's just a light briefer. I mean, clearly we didn't get into the nitty-gritty. I've got some other posts about that. So remember, when writing combat, it's not about the guts and glory. It's about the story and the characters. And that's all for today. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that subscribe button and share it with all your friends. It goes a long way towards helping people find me. And I'll be back again next Monday with more writing tips and writerly musings. Bye-bye.